Hello, everybody. Happy International Women's Day to you. I am soon to be joined by Dominie Moss of the Return Hub. And today we're going to be talking about 5 steps that we as individuals can take to break the bias. So once we get Dominie in, we'll talk about the 5 things that we have been noticing that individuals can do. And here comes Dominie now. I know Dominie's had some internet issues, but hopefully she is in. No, she's not. Come on, Dominie. Okay, we'll just give her a second. Okay. Poor old Dominie, the stress of having to make your internet work when you are doing an Instagram live, it's a nightmare. Let's give her another second. I'm just going to try and invite her. Okay. Aha!
Hi! Hi!
Stressful. I feel for you. It's awful when your internet doesn't
Oh
play.
my goodness me, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Helen, and I'm so sorry, everyone. That's super apologies. The gremlins are with me today, let's say.
No, I've been there. It's stressful. And so I was saying that this is the culmination. Oh, happy International Women's Day, by the way, Dominie. Yes. I've not said that to you yet.
Yes, happy International Women's Day to you too, and to everyone that's watching.
Yeah. Today's the culmination of some work that we've been doing over recent weeks, looking at lots of landmark events and good things that happen around this topic of break the bias. And we've been doing it in our own way, which is to look at our favourite 5s. And the reason we've chosen 5 is that the Return Hub has recently turned 5 years old, and the Tall Wall has turned 5 years old. So we've been looking at our favourite 5 podcasts on gender equality, our favourite 5 books on gender equality, our favourite 5 campaigners, our favourite female entrepreneurs. And we've been listing all these favourite 5s. And today is about looking at the individual steps we can take to break the bias. And I was thinking, this is not a problem that government's going to solve on its own or businesses are going to solve on their own. This is a problem we all need to take our part in solving, which really means we have to change our behaviour. Women have to change their behaviour as well as the system being changed. And so we wanted to talk today, Dom, didn't we, about 5 things that we could do. And we wanted to start on one of our favourite topics, which is money, which we've talked about before.
Money. Gosh, we have, haven't we?
Negotiating it.
Sometimes it feels like, it's such a massive mountain to climb, isn't it? And every year International Women's Day comes around and you sometimes obviously the big things one can feel a bit helpless, and so we just really wanted to kind of boil it down into what are the things that actually can really make a difference and where you feel like you've got some sense of control over what might happen. And money, in our conversations about money, it's always struck me that it's a kind of taboo, isn't it? It's a sort of somehow it's not done to talk about money, and you can be made to feel quite shameful about it if you do, like it's sort of off limits territory. Yes. And of course, that's all very convenient if you already have a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's.
I think the thing we don't do is ask enough questions about money. I don't think if we're going to really crack the gender pay gap, hopefully people will know by now that November the 10th is Equal Pay Day, and that's the point when women effectively stop earning whilst men continue earning through the end of the calendar year. That's how big the gender pay gap is. So I think asking questions about what you're paid versus your peers, and I don't know, I think this is controversial, and I personally have been told off in my career for doing this, but also talking to peers about what you earn, because, and I think there's risks to doing that, but having more of an open conversation about how much you are paid and asking questions about where you sit in the effectively the league table of your peers.
Do you think men talk about it? I wonder if they do, if they sort of happily share how big their bonus was. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know, but I wonder if it is a bit gendered and that we sort of feel like, well, we mustn't talk about that kind of stuff because it's not the done thing. But I think the other thing I would say is that develop a relationship with a headhunter, because they are a fountain of information about all things salary related. We spend much of our time trying to gather all this data, which is very useful, obviously, for our clients and our candidates, but it gives us a kind of 30,000 feet view, I suppose, of what the market rate is for certain roles in certain sectors. So if you're thinking, actually, I don't feel comfortable asking my colleague how much money they earn, which, fair enough, that's probably could be quite a bold move. It's a good idea to develop that relationship with a good headhunter, not forgetting that they may also be interested in some of the information that you could share with them, market intelligence and the like. But they're usually a good source of information around salaries and compensation.
I think that's great advice. And I remember talking to a CEO who had 20 people reporting into them. 18 of them were women. So 2 were men, 18 women. And he remembers saying how shocked he was the first time he did the pay and rations round, how the 2 men challenged the number and that none of the 18 women challenged the number. He couldn't believe that none of them had said, how did this number get decided and where do I sit versus my peers?
Yeah.
None of the women did that. And these are all senior women in senior roles.
Yeah.
And I think that's staggering. I think ask more questions. Don't just take it.
I can totally remember when I was probably about 15 years ago now, going into the bonus conversation with my boss at the time, and I look back and I think cringe, because I was literally so grateful. I was so grateful.
Yes.
I was literally just like so grateful. I was almost like I didn't really feel I deserved it. Isn't that so strange to think that? I look back and think, what was my reaction? Did it make him think, oh, I must have paid it too much? Because I was kind of, definitely kind of somewhat pathetically grateful, probably looking back. And I remember not long after that, the company sent us on a negotiation training course. And I thought, that's very interesting, because I remember that one of the first things they said, this is quite some years ago, so maybe this training has changed now, but one of the first things that they talked to us about and that really stuck in my mind was what your facial expression should be on a first offer. And it's the
yes.
Your face is meant to sort of communicate 1,000 words, whatever the expression is. A picture can tell 1,000 words, and your sort of initial reaction has got to be as if that's not quite what I had in mind. And I just thought how utterly I'd failed at that in my first.
I bet you didn't make that mistake again.
No.
I've been on a similar negotiation course, and one thing they said to me was, when you're trying to negotiate upwards, you use your hands. So I think body language says a lot, doesn't it? Say, I'm looking for, you can't quite see on the screen, but if you spread your hands wide, you say, I'm looking for a substantial increase in that. Let me literally show it with your hands. I'm looking for a substantial increase in that, or I'm looking for a substantial cut in that price, or whatever it is, but using your body language. But money is one thing, right? So speaking out about money, asking questions about money, even if it seems cringeworthy, I think, and we both think, is a step we can all take.
Yeah.
The next one we were thinking of was about not apologizing for having a family. And I hear this all the time, and I've been guilty of it, where I will say, I'm really sorry, I can't make that meeting because I have to go and pick up my daughter from school. And I think there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to go and pick up my daughter from school. It's the sorry that comes at the start of that sentence. I think we undermine ourselves, and why should we apologize for having a family?
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's so easily done, isn't it? Because you feel like you're going to be letting somebody down. But the fact of the matter is, if you're not picking up your child or going to their play or whatever it is, you're letting them down. So you kind of have a choice, don't you, as to who are you letting. It feels that way. And then it kind of all wraps up in that kind of guilt that we, live with somewhat and carry a bit too heavily maybe. But it was interesting. So I was thinking about this, stop apologizing for having a family. And then there's been reading something about the language that we use in emails as well, which I think is sort of quite related in the same topic about starting off emails in a kind of apologetic way, you know, just writing to say, or just wanting to follow up on this, or you know, I hope this all makes sense. You know, this sort of language, which is very in tone, can be very apologetic, and how perhaps there are different ways of writing things and cutting out these, you know, just asking, just doing this, you know, this sort of deferential, somewhat apologetic tone, I guess, is should be dropped.
The phrase for them is they're shrinkers, because they shrink the impact you're trying to make, that those words just and sorry. Okay. And compare sorry, but I have to go and pick up my daughter from school with I have to go and pick up my daughter from school now, or I'm going to go and pick up my daughter from school now. Let's pick this up later. So I'm going to go and pick up my daughter from school now. Let's pick this up later is much more impactful than I'm really sorry, I have to go and pick up my daughter from school. Saying it with absolute conviction, even if inside you're thinking, oh my God. And I would invite leaders, if more people in positions of authority can do that, it gives other people permission to do the same. It's really important that you're setting the standard for that as a leader in an organization.
Absolutely. You've got to role model that behavior yourself. And you know, if you talk about flexible working and you talk about the importance of family values in your organization, make sure that you're modeling that yourself, and that people really believe it, and it's not just some words in an annual report or an external communicate or an internal communications document, but you know, it's more than that.
It's hard. It's hard to, because I think there's two schools of thought, isn't there? One, you don't talk about things outside of home, and the other is you're upfront about I'm going to go and pick up my daughter from school, rather than I've got another meeting I've got to go to. Actually, I think being honest about the commitments that you have is really powerful, because we're all role models, whether we like it or not, in a good way or a not so good way. And I think actually being honest about commitments you have outside of the home and outside of work is something we should all be trying to do, because it's reality, it's life.
Exactly. And it doesn't all fit into a neat little box called work.
No, exactly.
But there was another one, wasn't there, about returning to work, which is obviously a specialist subject.
Yes.
And just thinking about whether there's a perfect time to do it. And one of our brilliant candidates, and actually one of the women that we've done one of our On Point series of conversations with, Lee Georges, who did a brilliant talk to some of our candidates a few years ago now, and she talked about one of the best bits of advice that she gave them, which has really stuck in my mind, is the idea that if you wait until everything is perfectly aligned in your life to go back to work, you basically will never do it, because there will never be a perfect time. There'll always be an exam that your child needs to take and study and help for, or a house move, or another baby, or something, you know, something going on in your life, like a house move, I don't know, whatever it is, where you can sort of put it off and say, well, I'll do it after that, or once I've got this all arranged, or I don't have any good childcare, or whatever the reason is. It will never happen. And to some extent, this is what she was saying, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. You just got to make the decision, go for it, and know that everything will fall into place. And sometimes it will be messy, and sometimes the ball will be dropped, but fundamentally it will be all right.
Yeah. So if there's anyone watching this who's thinking about returning to work after a career break, I guess the first step is just to investigate, go and see what's out there, talk to the Return Hub, see what's possible. Because I think, it is a big step, isn't it, to go back to work after having a career break. This is not a small decision to make, but start to investigate it and find out the facts, rather than wistfully thinking about it every now and again, but not doing anything about it. Because there's so much help, and there is so much encouragement for women returning to the workplace now after a career break. There's never been a better time to try and do it.
Absolutely. And on that, actually, do go and visit the Career Academy on the Return Hub website. There's loads of content there. There's loads of material. It's all totally free. There's mini masterclasses on everything from CV writing to interview skills, as well as blogs and content and stories and all sorts of good stuff. So do go and check that out if you're at that stage where you're thinking, I must get myself ready.
Yeah, that's a great way to break the bias, is to get more women into the workplace who come from a slightly different career path. I think that's a brilliant example to so many of us. The other area that we thought of Dom, was speaking up in group situations or getting the airtime that you require. And I think we can all do this. You know, we have all, as women, been in a team meeting or a group situation where we're not quite given the airtime, or we don't get the airtime, and we're interrupted, or we share an idea and it's not taken seriously. And I think there's a lot we can do to break that. And these are micro things that you can do in the moment when you're in a team setting and you just don't feel you're getting the airtime you deserve. I mean, one of the points is about interruptions, isn't it? So the evidence tells us that women are interrupted a lot more than men, mostly by men. And that's not because men want ill intent for women, but it's sort of systemic that somehow women can be interrupted. And I think we were debating, what can you do when someone interrupts you in a meeting? And you and I were at a breakfast last week, and we talked about this to the guest speaker, Marianne Segar, and she said, keep talking if you can, although that's quite bold. When someone's trying to interrupt you, you just keep on talking. She also said, have a quiet word with the chair after. If it's a regular meeting, ask them to support you next time, because they may not have noticed that you were being interrupted. So I think there's things we can do to have more of a voice in a group setting.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think also if you're in that meeting yourself and you feel comfortable and you're in a position perhaps where you feel, you know, confident, and you to speak up and say, oh, actually, sorry, I just was really interested in that point that Anne was making, or whatever it was, and just slightly kind of subtly, you know, or maybe not subtly, actually, why do we have to be subtle? But to obviously take the temperature of the room, maybe. But, you know, help that person out and see if you can help bring them to the fore and help them kind of, you know, find their voice again.
If there's another woman in the meeting, and chances are you're in the minority as women, if there's another woman and you haven't heard from them and you think they'd be comfortable, they're obviously wanting to say something. I noticed we haven't heard from Dominie. Dominie, what do you think? Or hang on a minute, John, I'd really like to hear what Dominie has to say on that. And you help. We need to help each other to get that voice. It can be so difficult to be in the minority in a room, and unless you've been there, you really don't know what it feels like.
Yes. And talking about that breakfast that we went to, that you hosted and organised, which was amazing and brilliant, by the way. The speaker, as Helen said, Marianne Segar, who's written this brilliant book, The Authority Gap. I thought this is a book that everybody should read. You know, every man and woman should read this book. It's absolute eye-opener, backed up by lots of research, but also the wonderful thing is there's lots of real stories in there, aren't there? There's lots of actual real life stories of what's happened, which probably brings us on to the number 5.
Yes, Marianne shares a brilliant story. So we've talked about money, we've talked about not apologising for family, we've talked about a career break, we've talked about speaking up in a meeting. The last one is about how to deal with patronising, condescending comments that strip you of your authority. And Marianne shared an instance of when she was at an event and she got sat next to a guy and he said, what do you do? And she reeled off lots of things because she wears lots of different hats. She's a journalist, she's a visiting professor, she sits on board, she's an author. And when she, 30 seconds, given a summary of what she does, he said, well, you're a busy little girl, aren't you? And as she pointed out, she was older than the then Prime Minister. And we said to her, how did you respond? And she said, well, I said I've not been called a little girl since I was about 6. And I thought that was a great way of responding with warmth, because there's no point getting uppity about it or getting on your high horse, because I think that inflames the situation. You need to respond wittily. And I wish I was that person that could be so witty.
It's difficult. I know, me too. It's, what do they have? The French have an expression, don't they? Which is it ponce d'escalier? Have you heard that expression?
Oh, what does that mean? No.
It means the thought on the staircase, which is brilliant. And I wish I could have a ponce d'escalier, so that doesn't sound too silly. But you know, that moment when actually what's actually happening to you is your cheeks are burning. You're kind of filled with kind of shock, embarrassment, shame, whatever it might be, at this kind of comment that's been just totally belittled you. And how do you think of in the moment that quick witty thing? But yeah, it's difficult at the time. But maybe one needs to have a kind of a couple of phrases in the back pocket to kind of pull out at the right time.
Yes. I've been told, oh, you know a thing or two, don't you? In a very condescending pitch. And I've said, yes, I do. You know, in just quite a straight face. I've also been patted on the head a long time ago, literally patted on the head.
Wow.
I'm quite small, so that was, literally this guy was massive. He literally patted me on. I didn't do anything. I was so embarrassed. I don't think anyone would dare do that to me now, although I don't know, I might be proved wrong. But it's standing up to those moments and where you can, where words do come to mind, you respond and you don't just take them.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly.
I don't think the people that are saying these things mean any harm, but I think it needs to be called out that it's not helpful.
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. It needs kind of constant and constant awareness and just constant calling out, I think, to kind of make sure that perhaps that same person thinks twice before doing it to another woman.
Yes.
And stepping on her authority.
Yeah. So today we're talking about individual steps we can take. Obviously, this is not about women to fix this problem on their own. There's lots of things that everyone needs to take. And the first step you can take is to educate yourself, men and women, on what is really going on. And Mary Ann's book is a great example of doing that. So there's 5 things, 5 individual steps. Anything to add, Dom, before we close?
I don't know. I think we probably covered quite a lot of ground, but I just say I know none of this stuff is really easy. Some of it's really difficult, but hopefully they are some small things that one can do to try and affect change in your own life and in your own network. And maybe not all of them, maybe not all 5 of those things, but
just
one or 2. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just do one small change to break the bias. If we all did one thing, imagine the cumulative effect of that. It'd be really powerful.
Absolutely, exactly.
Thank you, Dominie. If you want to check out more material, videos, exercises, helpful hints and tips, look at our website, thetallwall.com, the Return Hub's website. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, check us out, and we'll see you next month, I believe, for another conversation. So thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining. Have a wonderful International Women's Day, and best of luck in experimenting with all these steps that you can take.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.